The words hour and place can be interpreted in many ways. When we think of ours, it can pertain to things belonging to or connected with us. It invokes a sense of ownership, but is anything truly ours in respect to Australia, for example? And when we speak of place, it can be a particular point or area in space, but also can mean a role or a position.
Project was like a dream come true. I found my happy place.
These are the things I want to explore in this video essay. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and ongoing custodians of the land, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Firstly, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, the traditional owners of the land on which RMIT stands. Secondly, the Whadjuk Noongar people of southwestern Australia, the ancestral lands on which Perth was built and where I was born and raised. I recognise their connection to their land, waters and culture, and acknowledge their strength in spirit and in survival against all odds. I would like to pay my respects to the elders of past, present and future, recognising the indignities and atrocities perpetrated by the early European settlers, and eventually our government, who claimed this land for their own settlement and exploitation, attempting to wipe out over 60,000 years of Indigenous human history. Sovereignty was never ceded. This land was, and always will be, Aboriginal land. There's a sense of great sadness that exists in Melbourne. I've always felt it at some level since I've moved here from Perth. It was only when I started to learn about Australia's true history that I understood where this feeling is coming from. Sometimes, history tends to favour a storyline or a narrative. Often this serves a motive or a purpose. The history I was taught growing up cleverly avoided topics such as Indigenous rights or the genocide that took place within Australia since colonisation in 1788. When we say our place, it's based on a false narrative. It's basically a lie, and we need to know the truth. For example, outwardly, we may see Melbourne as this eclectic, beautiful place, but it hides an invisible Indigenous history. Melbourne, or Naarm, as it is referred to by the traditional owners of the land, has always been an important meeting place for events of social, educational, sporting and cultural significance. These places may not be immediately apparent or obvious to the wider community, but nevertheless hold a range of cultural values in the Aboriginal community. Admittedly, as a white settler, I found it quite hard to be confronted by and reflect on my complex relationship to the ongoing colonisation and dispossession of Aboriginal people. I was profoundly affected by a simple but very powerful poem by Lisa Bellier entitled Beautiful Yurok, Red River Gum. The poem reflects on the genocide that is evident in the surrounding environment, placed as significant as the Melbourne cricket ground mentioned casually amongst quotes like, and Yarra tribe's blood becoming the river's rich red clay, symbolically with Red River gums being replaced by plain English ones, and still the survivors watch. When then reflecting on other students' work, I was able to notice the large gap between the true history of Melbourne versus the shiny side that is often portrayed here. Garen's lecture promoted us to think more deeply about what it means to acknowledge Aboriginal sovereignty in the place we are in. I acknowledge that there is a need for me to do more in-depth and continuing self-reflection about who I am, my place here in Australia, my motivations to support Aboriginal struggles as well as my values, so that I can embed and do sustained practices of solidarity that is meaningful and appropriate to my own particular context and situation. I think as a whole, our place is not to be saviours, but to become genuine allies and work in solidarity in the fight for Indigenous rights and sovereignty. This means we need to do a lot more self-reflection, education and listening. It means acknowledging that we come in from a position of power and privilege. Privilege that we've acquired through unjust systems that discriminate and marginalise Aboriginal communities we seek to ally with. Days like Australia Day celebrate this false narrative that often fuels racism and violence. This is especially damaging when it comes from people of authority, like our elected representatives who publicly say racist comments and peddle misinformation like reverse racism. Our place as allies involve amplifying the voices of Indigenous communities and not making it about ourselves, and cultivating a kind of cultural literacy, a concerted effort to eradicate the ignorance that underpins the relationships that Aboriginal people have with the broader community, and ignorance fed by stereotypes and myths that have been handed down over generations. According to Sarah Madison, Senior Associate at the University of New South Wales and author of Black Politics, if reconciliation is to have any meaning in Australia, it requires that, as a nation, we face up to our history in ways that will allow all of us to move forward, psychologically and politically.